An aged black judge sat quietly in a park, engrossed in a book, seemingly overlooked by the world. But when 3 teenagers tried to turn him into a viral spectacle, they unknowingly challenged history itself. What unfolded next sent shockwaves through an entire community. Dear viewer, what you are about to witness isn't just a narrative. It's a profound testament to the silent strength and relentless pursuit of justice in places often disregarded. If this is your first visit, I warmly invite you to share your location in the comments below. And if stories like this resonate with you, provoke thought, or inspire, please consider subscribing and activating the bell icon. We amplify voices that deserve to be heard daily. Thank you for joining us. Now let's delve into the story. The late afternoon sun dappled through the dense oak and maple canopies of Riverside Commons, casting shifting patterns of light and shadow across the worn benches and winding pathways. On one such bench, a solitary figure, stooped and serene, initially blended seamlessly with the tranquil suburban scene. Mr. Arthur Hayes, a retired federal judge, sat absorbed in a leather-bound memoir, his cane resting quietly beside him. His presence was an integral part of the park's ordinary rhythm. Yet that tranquility was a delicate illusion. A trio of teenagers, bold, self-assured, and oblivious to the gravity of their actions, encircled him. Their laughter pierced the quiet like spilled ink, marring a pristine canvas. They edged closer, phones poised to record. Jackson Reed, tall and slender with an overly confident smirk, leaned in as if he owned every inch of that shaded clearing. Beside him, Harper Lang and Eli Carter followed suit, a mix of jest and mockery, fueled by the thrill of filming an easy target. Reed's voice slithered through the air. Look at this ancient history in action. Bet he thinks he's someone important. Harper nodded, her mouth twisted in amusement. Together they advanced, phones raised, recording, eager for a reaction. Hey Grandpa, Reed began, his voice dripping with irony. How does it feel to be living off the government, paid to read books all day? The remark was deliberate, designed to provoke, to stain this everyday park moment with humiliation and scorn. Hayes looked up slowly, his calm gaze measured. Those serene eyes, so rarely disturbed, met Reed's, not with fear but with quiet gravity. The boys closed in, circling Hayes like predators. Harper taunted gently at first. Tell us, old-timer, what's it like being born 100 years before us? Even Eli's laughter echoed hollowly, complicit but uneasy. Hayes said nothing. He continued reading, fingers tracing lines of ancient text, refusing to flinch. That silence was a bulwark. Gasps of realization rippled through the trio of tormentors. They had anticipated an easy punchline. Instead they faced unflinching dignity. Reed snarled, "Come on, give us something for the camera. A shuffle dance maybe." Harper laughed. Eli swallowed, the tension as heavy as storm clouds ready to break. Hayes sat, the pages open but his mind far from the words. He sensed a shift not just in the boy's energy but in the very air around him. They pressed closer and Reed's phone zoomed in. Then, in a flash, it happened. Reed shoved Hayes. It wasn't forceful but it was violent enough. Beneath the olive-green canopy the old judge tumbled, his book flying, his cane clattering across the pavement. Shock shattered the taunting moment. Reed grinned into his phone as Hayes hit the ground. Look at him fall into history. Harper shrieked with false delight. Eli recorded, transfixed. The 3 circled, filming the old man struggling to rise. Reed crouched, pressing the record button with savage enjoyment. Smile for your fans, he mocked. Hayes reached for his cane, his hands shaking not from pain, but from untarnished dignity. He steadied himself, wincing, adjusting his glasses as if meticulously reassembling his composure. The boys' laughter crescendoed, callous, cruel. That mocking gesture, their smirk, would be captured, played back, dissected, shared. Then Harper uncorked their final contempt. She kicked a crumpled soda can into his path. Enjoy the ambience, Grandpa, she sneered. Reed shared a high five. Eli looked away, guilt flickering in his eyes but remained present. Silence reasserted itself, heavy, broken. Hayes paused. He did not retaliate. Instead he laid his book on his lap, breathed in deeply and locked eyes with Reed, his expression unreadable yet fierce. His voice cut across the hush like a blade. Is this how you define entertainment? The words resonated, not loud but sharpened with resolve. The teenagers froze, their cameras wavered. "Why are you mocking me?" he asked quietly, pain and dignity braided in his tone. A faint hush wrapped through the park. That single question, posed without fury, transformed the moment. Their laughter betrayed discomfort. The park's patrons stirred, uncertain who was the victim, who the perpetrator. It was a question that reframed the entire encounter, a mirror held to their cruelty. Reed hesitated, then, still filming, he lowered the phone. The group's bravado flickered. They had cast themselves as judges of some petty court, and now the real judge was speaking. For a moment the world held its breath. That moment, suspended between cruelty and compassion, between ridicule and reckoning, was the beginning. No one who saw it that day would ever forget it. And no one would walk away without asking, how would this story end? What began as another viral prank in Riverside Commons would soon spiral into something far greater. A reckoning extending beyond the park's boundaries. Arthur Hayes awoke the next morning in his modest suburban home with a sharp ache radiating from his hip. The bruise beneath his dignity throbbed more painfully than any physical wound. He moved slowly, each step a reminder of the humiliation he endured, but also a testament to his resilience. After all, a bruise fades, a story can heal. He dressed carefully, slipping into a crisp dress shirt and trousers, his ritual armor. At the kitchen table he sipped coffee, inspecting the tender purple bloom forming along his ribs. He recalled the shove, the laughter, the kin kicked at his feet, the weight of invisible wounds heavy in his chest. Bias isn't always loud. Sometimes it festers silently, only fully understood in the solitude of night. His daughter, Marissa Hayes, entered the kitchen, her face a canvas of resolve and concern. She handed him the tablet, the viral video now viewed by thousands. He watched it again, quieter this time, not out of discomfort but because he was studying it. The patterns of cruelty, the escalation of youthful entitlement, the chilling distance between his vulnerability and their mockery. Marissa's voice trembled as she whispered, "Dad, I can't even bear to watch it." He reached out, covering her hand with his. "You must," he said softly. "We have to see it all so we know what we're facing." She nodded. He felt her grief, but beneath it, a fierce fire. She was no stranger to his tenacity. Soon news began to surface in small bursts online. An elderly black man assaulted at Riverside Commons, footage taken by teenagers. No one had identified him yet, but the story was spreading fragment by fragment. His legal contacts reached out quietly, journalists, former clerks, civil rights advocates, all wanting to know who he was. But Hayes instructed Marissa to release nothing until they understood the implications. There would be time for headlines. First, there needed to be strategy. He spent the morning reviewing his own records, carefully curated, meticulously maintained, a lifetime of decisions that upheld justice and rights. He wasn't naive about his identity. As news outlets began to contact anxious PR handlers, Hayes practiced restraint. He declined interviews through his daughter's quiet, unwavering instructions. They needed control and clarity. Meanwhile, Jackson Reed, Harper Lang, and Eli Carter woke in their respective homes with an entirely different kind of ache. The last night had been rough. Their phones exploded with notifications like shrapnel, outraged comments, some praising them, others condemning them in brutal terms. Accusations of racism, violence, hate crimes. They barely bothered to read them at first, scoffing at adult overreaction. But something shifted as they scrolled deeper. Jackson's parents had confronted him over breakfast, faces red with anger, voices louder than he'd ever heard. "What did you do?" his father demanded, slamming cereal against the counter. Jackson stared at the tile beneath his feet. "It was just a joke," he mumbled. "They started it." His mother's eyes softened. His father shook his head. "You hurt someone," his father said. "You shamed our name and you can't undo that." Harper cried silently in her bathroom mirror before school, mascara streaking her cheeks. Her friends offered empty reassurances over text. "It's just a meme. People move on." But the interruption in her social feed between moral outrage and viral mockery left her cold. Rumors already circulated that a lawsuit might be coming, maybe even criminal charges pending, assault or hate crime. The fear spread inside her, colder than any bruise she could imagine. Eli woke in the early dawn with pounding headaches. He deleted his video, but screenshots, reposts, still lurked in digital corners. He couldn't escape the faces on the comments, creepy bullies, racists, grown-ups coming for payback. He felt shame for his complicity. He considered confession, but the weight of imagined consequences froze him. Even worse, he didn't know where to begin. Back at the Hayes household, noon brought a discreet visit from an old colleague, former Judge Samuel Ortiz, a legal eagle with media savvy. Ortiz offered quiet counsel, no rush. Let the immediate outrage settle, then decide whether to pursue a civil claim, press charges, or simply reveal your identity. You control the narrative. Arthur Hayes shook his head thoughtfully. This isn't about me, he replied. It's about a larger truth. Adults enabling cruelty, youth with no guidance, a community failing its elders. Marissa interjected. But Dad, the longer we wait, the more others define it for us. We shape it now or we risk losing clarity. Hayes looked at her through warm eyes. He was right. He was ready. Meanwhile, Riverside Commons became a microcosm of tension. Park regulars whispered anxiously, should they speak out? Should they have stepped in? A community meeting was called that afternoon at the nearby community center. It drew neighbors, pastors, teachers, even the teenagers' parents, faces marked with resentment, defensiveness, shame. Marissa led the meeting, her voice shaky but coherent. She outlined what happened, showed the footage, and introduced a statement from her father. Watching her father's words, standing in the shadows, immobile, dignified. She spoke of accountability, empathy, the urgency of changing culture. Some parents nodded, others avoided her eyes. Murmurs of entrapment, that he was looking for attention. A few shouted their objections, but she held firm, courage bloodline deep. At Park's edge, an elderly black woman named Mrs. Gregory stood trembling as she watched everyone argue. She'd been there many afternoons, greeting Hayes with cookies, checking in on his well-being. Now she felt torn. Should I speak or step back? Her voice cracked when she finally stood. I've lived here 50 years, she began. I've seen how racism hides under polite smiles. What happened today, this is just the tip and it breaks my heart. Heads turned. A hush followed. Some cried. The bruise beneath not just Hayes's hip, but the bruise beneath the fabric of the community was revealed. As the meeting ended, Hayes stepped forward. He acknowledged his physical pain but spoke of emotional resilience. What happened here isn't irreparable, he said. But we all must choose whether we stand for compassion or complacency. The next morning, social media exploded when Hayes went public. He released a statement identifying himself, clarifying his intentions. Not vengeance but accountability. He expressed forgiveness for the boys, emphasizing that accountability helps heal. He announced he would pursue a civil claim against their parents, the school and local authorities for enabling a culture of disrespect and normalized hate. But he also announced a community initiative. Free legal clinics for youth, guided mentorship programs, counseling resources. A restorative response, not merely punitive reactions. Reactions ranged from admiration to criticism. Some called him a saint. Others accused him of smearing the boys and their families. But the bruise beneath had been exposed. Could no longer be ignored. And in its place, a path to healing had begun. For Jackson, Harper, and Eli, the real impact was dawning. Their phones buzzed with attorneys, journalists, advocates, but also parents, neighbors, and classmates asking why they'd crossed the line. And now they stood at a crossroads. Meanwhile, Hayes prepared for the next stage. His bruise would heal, but the lessons seeded would endure. He would see this through not for himself, but for communities everywhere where whispered biases go unchecked, and for the bruises that lie beneath, waiting for light. The next step begins soon. Cordelia Blake stood before the courthouse windows the next morning, her reflection fragmented by the early sun's rays. She was reflecting not only on yesterday's confrontation but on the broader history this incident stirred, how pain and prejudice are handed down through generations. Across town, Samuel Hayes, retired judge, prepared for his first official testimony. Behind them lay a moment of reckoning. Ahead, a reckoning with a legacy that reached deep into Pinebrook's past. The courtroom buzzed with subdued tension. Jackson Reed and Harper Lang sat together, their parents beside them, faces etched with anxiety. In the gallery, Cordelia watched Serena Blake, the mother of Eli Carter, clutching a worn tissue, her eyes red. The three youths weren't just defendants now, they were symbols in a larger story. And the story stretched far beyond the park bench in Riverside Commons. Sam Hayes approached the stand with measured steps, his cane tapping carefully against the polished floor. He paused, letting the courtroom absorb his presence. A black man who had spent decades interpreting the Constitution and defending civil rights. In his sharp suit and steady posture, he carried the weight of history onto that stage. Cordelia felt a lump in her throat. His personal tale of yesterday's violence was powerful, but Sam's life journey was the deeper echo the courtroom needed to confront. When the bailiff asked him to raise his right hand, he did so without hesitation. "I do solemnly swear to tell the truth, so help me God." He paused before answering his first question, drawing upon a vault of memories. He recounted his life, from practicing law in segregated neighborhoods to his appointments to the bench in the early 90s. He described his gentle efforts to mentor young attorneys and to cultivate fairness in a system that often favored the powerful. Then he returned to yesterday, the shove, the broadcast, the unexpected pain. Yet through his narrative, the bruise was no longer just physical. It was ancestral, spanning centuries of unspoken suffering. Cordelia remembered a story Hayes once shared over coffee about his grandmother crossing state lines to vote, dancing with defiance. She had never forgotten that spark, and now, years later, it blazed anew in the courtroom as Hayes spoke against the injustice done to him, a symbol of dignity met with cruelty. His testimony wasn't simply victimhood. It was resilience, calling out the descendants of privilege and asking them to acknowledge their inherited power. Then came the defense. A sharp, polished attorney, Ms. Reed, rose to speak for Jackson, Harper, and Eli. She framed their actions as immature and impulsive, not hateful. They did wrong, yes, but it was a momentary lapse, not a reflection of race or hate. She pointed out each teen's academic record, their extracurriculars, their mental health challenges. The courtroom noted her effort to humanize them. But Cordelia felt uneasy. She remembered an earlier conversation with Harper's aunt, who admitted that comments at the breakfast table often reminded Harper and Jackson they belonged to a better group. Cordelia clenched her notebook tighter. This wasn't just about impulses. It was about identity shaped across family lines. The judge permitted the defense a moment to present that context. Harper, voice shaking, took the stand. She looked at Hayes, his face grave but calm. I didn't intend to hurt him, sir," she began, glancing at her mother, Angela. "But when we recorded him, I wanted approval. I thought it'd be funny." She sighed, eyes downcast. "I know now how wrong that was." Cordelia exchanged eye contact with Hayes's daughter, Marissa. Accountability, not deflection. That sincerity mattered. Eli Carter followed next. The courtroom held its breath as he described shame for his tears, for taking part in the cruelty. "It wasn't courage," he said, "it was fear. Fear of being seen as less if I didn't go along." Cordelia understood that instinct all too well, joining the crowd to avoid standing out. She jotted notes, aware that collective culture often bound individuals to collective guilt. Then Jackson Reed rose. He spoke haltingly but clearly. "Judge Hayes did nothing to provoke us," he admitted. "We made him the target because he looked vulnerable." He forced himself to look at Hayes. The judge watched silently, no flicker of judgment, only the slow nod of understanding. "I'm sorry," Jackson said, voice thick. "I wish I could take it back." Cordelia felt the air shift. This courtroom wasn't just about consequences. It was about truth. The echoes she'd been grappling with, segregation, generational bias, were being spoken aloud. Tears streamed down some faces. Others left behind masks of denial. Harper's mother covered her mouth, eyes glistening. Serena Blake wiped her own tears, sharing a mother's pain. Change, Cordelia realized, always begins with those hard first words. Hayes's attorney then introduced community elders and historians. They spoke of Pinebrook's past, redlining maps from the 60s, school circuit maps that excluded black neighborhoods, club records that refused entry to minority families. One document even listed a single black voter in Pinebrook's precinct in 1972, a glaring symbol of exclusion. As layers emerged, the courtroom image changed. This wasn't an isolated incident. It was the fruit of a systemic tree. Cordelia watched Sam Hayes rise again, his voice quiet, firm. "Injustice isn't always loud. It's often the silence that allows it to grow." Yesterday's shove is an echo of today when we neglect to talk, when we dismiss pain, when we choose comfort over confronting our own privilege. The judge's gavel tapped gently. In that moment, Cordelia saw a bridge built between memory and accountability, pain and possibility. When closing arguments began, the prosecution requested damages not only for bodily harm but for emotional suffering, for the community's hurt, for lasting change. The defense countered, citing family discipline, school punishment, suggesting those were the boundaries still operating. Cordelia believed such frameworks were insufficient. This was bigger, defining a culture that dared to treat dignity as a joke. Outside the courtroom, the media swarmed, covering every moment. Cordelia spotted her own face among the clips. She'd reported not merely the facts, but the story of generational echoes, the way a single shove stirred buried pain and demanded awakening. People on the street stopped her. Some thanked her, some berated her, but all were aware this moment mattered. Days later, the judge issued a limited ruling. She found liability at least partial for the teens, requiring them to serve community service with restorative justice programs, provide public apologies, and for the town to fund resilience workshops for elders. Additionally, a formal examination into Pinebrook's policies was mandated. Cordelia watched Sam Hayes stand outside the courtroom steps, eyes closed against the sun. He smiled slightly, perhaps not because of the ruling, but because acknowledgement had broken a long silence. That afternoon, Cordelia visited Riverside Commons. Judge Hayes sat in the same spot where he'd been shoved. Children kicked a soccer ball nearby. Flowers had been planted around the bench. Hayes and his daughter Marissa handed out water and talked with neighbors who approached to say thanks, to share stories, to promise to be better witnesses. Cordelia filmed their exchanges, a testament to resilience transformed into hopeful action. Before leaving, Cordelia approached Hayes. He looked tired but at peace. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for your courage, for your justice." He shook his head. "I didn't act alone. This moment is shaped by everyone who refused to pretend it didn't matter." Cordelia realized that investigating and reporting were one thing, but it was human connection and courageous acknowledgement that carried the change forward. The echoes of Pinebrook's past were still present, but now they had become a pulse for renewal. At sunset, the county line posted a sign funded by the courthouse ruling, one Cordelia helped design. "In this place we remember, we learn, we move forward together." Beneath it, Judge Hayes and Marissa took turns planting a native oak, symbol of strength and roots. Cordelia closed her camera, letting the moment sink in. Those planted roots would one day grow strong branches, sheltering future stories, better stories, planting redemption in a community that needed it most. The day the trial began, the courthouse corridor felt less like wood-paneled halls and more like the fault lines of a community's conscience. Judge Emily Rodas entered, carrying the weight of Pinebrook's soul on her gavel's edge. But it was retired federal Judge Samuel Hayes who carried the steely grace of lived history into the courtroom. Across from him sat Jackson Reed, Harper Lang, and Eli Carter, teenagers who had become unwitting symbols of entrenched bias. From the first murmur of opening statements, the air trembled. Prosecutor Laura Chen spoke with calm determination. "Your Honor, this case transcends simple youth misconduct. It's a moment when civility confronts contempt, where dignity demands accountability." She described how the attack and recorded humiliation didn't arise in a vacuum but rooted in a deeper pattern of normalized disrespect for elders and people of color. Her words painted each shove and jeer as echoes of systemic injustice. Defense attorney Marcus Fields responded by humanizing the teens, each with high grades, extracurricular passions, and loving families. This was not hate. It was foolishness, not guided by race but by immaturity. His words reflected compassion, but beneath them lurked the question, does intent alone absolve impact? The turning point came when Judge Rodas called retired Judge Hayes to take the stand. His cane tapped once as he rose, a profound declaration that he was neither victim nor martyr, but a seeker of truth. When he spoke, his voice resonated with decades of fairness. He did not plead sympathy. Instead, he framed the moments in the park as a painful reminder that the dignity of any one person reflects the dignity of a community. He paused, looking directly into the eyes of Jackson, Harper, and Eli. "You made choices. I forgive your intent, but I must not ignore your impact. In yielding to the crowd, you forced silence upon me. In using recorded cruelty, you weaponized it. Then he spoke openly about the bruised hip, but it was the bruised spirit he focused on. He spoke of how elders prudently teach wisdom, not vulnerability, and how communities are weighed down when civility is abandoned. Witnesses testified next. Historian Angela Carter took the stand, her sharp tone guiding jurors through decades of inequity in Pinebrook's policies. Board minutes, zoning maps, and school admission data revealed a town long guided by exclusion, even if unspoken. Each document chipped away at the defense's narrative of youthful anomaly and minimized impact. A pattern emerged. Individuality was no cover for collective enabling. One after another, families came forward. Rosa Jenkins, a retired school aide, described how her grandson was suspended for minor behavior while white students were excused for far worse. That testimony sparked hushed gasps. Evidence from loan denial files, racially coded emails from school board officials, and internal memos on how to preserve community character layered collusion over ignorance. Then the teenagers themselves took the stand. Harper Lang, eyes downcast, described her regret. It began as followers wanting likes. I didn't see how that urge became cruelty. Eli Carter spoke next, admitting he watched the video go viral and was struck by how viral rage could inflame even a moment of thoughtless laughter. Jackson Reed followed, tears brimming in his eyes. I thought we were joking. I realize now we joined a chorus that dehumanized someone who had defended fairness his entire life. These confessions were raw. There was no parental coaching. They were honest, trembling voices owning mistakes. Judge Hayes's face remained composed, their words imprinting truth on the auditorium. The defense, in closing, asserted that mistakes should be met with guidance, not punishment. Meanwhile, Prosecutor Chin stood and spoke with resolute clarity. Yes, guide them. But first hold them accountable. Because without accountability, forgiveness rings hollow. We ask the court to require public apologies, restorative community service, and to compel the town to allocate funds for elder and youth dialogue programs. Let this be a turning point. When the judge retreated for deliberation, the courtroom fell silent. Neither side claimed victory. The verdict, when it came, was neither total defeat nor sweeping exoneration. Rodas found the teens liable not just for harassment but for emotional injury. She ordered them to serve 30 hours of community service, including time at senior centers, to lead apology circles with residents, and to join a year-long mentorship program where they would listen to stories from elders. Additionally, Pinebrook Township was mandated to fund annual intergenerational respect workshops, to review school disciplinary practices, and to form an elder advisory council to embed dignity into local policies. Judge Rodas concluded with measured words. This court does not seek vengeance but restoration. Let this moment be the first step toward a community that meets mistakes with learning and community with accountability. Outside the courthouse, a mix of emotions welled. Elderly supporters hugged Judge Hayes. Families of the teens looked stunned but contemplative. Cordelia Blake, the local journalist who had chronicled each moment, watched them all with respect. Her story had captured not just the trial, but the unfolding of a community's reckoning. That evening, Judge Hayes returned to the same bench in Riverside Commons. He sat quietly, cane across his lap as a small group of teens, some from the trial, approached. They offered him hand-drawn apology cards and invited him to co-lead the new workshops. He looked at each one, seeing remorse, curiosity, and the stirring potential for change. He nodded and accepted their gesture, not as absolution, but as an invitation to build mutual understanding. Behind him, a sapling had been planted, an oak tree to grow with the reforms ordered the day before. As dusk settled, the oak silhouette stood tall, a quiet testament to growth rooted in accountability. Courtroom justice had opened the door, but this moment in the park promised to keep it open. Sam Hayes had sat as a judge and then as a teacher, guiding truth into action. A community had confronted its demons and had chosen to walk toward repair, not denial. Because true reckoning doesn't end with judges or verdicts. It lives on in everyday acts that honor dignity, embrace learning, and plant seeds of hope under old oak skies. The oak tree had grown tall enough to cast a modest shadow by the time Pinebrook gathered again at Riverside Commons. Months had passed since the courtroom's final gavel, but the echoes of that day still rippled through the town. And now, as the town unveiled a new monument near the bench where Judge Samuel Hayes once sat in silence and pain, the air was filled not with whispers of scandal but with reverence. The monument bore simple etched words. In this place we listened. In this place we changed. Underneath, a bronze plaque named the community elders and students who had shaped the town's new commitment to intergenerational justice. Judge Hayes stood beside it, cane in hand, though he leaned less on it now, his strength restored by something deeper than recovery, purpose. Cordelia Blake was there too, not as a journalist but as a voice invited to speak at the ceremony. Her reporting had sparked awareness, but it was her consistency that sparked reform. She told the crowd, "We cannot undo the hurt of our past, but we can decide what our legacy will be." Pinebrook chose to listen. Pinebrook chose to act. And now Pinebrook chooses to remember. Harper Lang, Jackson Reed and Eli Carter stood in the crowd, not as outcasts but as participants. Each had completed their service, led youth workshops, and built unexpected relationships with the elders they once dismissed. Jackson, once overwhelmed by shame, now ran a weekly discussion circle with high school students and senior mentors. Harper volunteered to document oral histories from Pinebrook's Black community. Eli had become an advocate for restorative justice, quiet but constant. Judge Hayes stepped to the podium last. His voice was soft but unwavering. "You rebuilt what many towns only paper over. I don't need statues or titles. I need conversations. This town gave me that and gave itself the courage to hold a mirror up to its own reflection." He paused, eyes scanning familiar faces, then continued, "A legacy isn't what we inherit. It's what we build from what we've learned. And today we lay new foundations." When the ceremony ended, the sun filtered through the tree leaves like old stories shared through fresh air. Laughter and music rose from families gathered under tents. The bruises had not vanished, but they had been named, tended to, and transformed. Pinebrook was no longer defined by a park confrontation. It was defined by what followed: empathy, accountability, and action. And in the shade of a tree grown from truth, the future, once cracked by silence, was taking root in the light. The story of Langston Cole is more than a confrontation in a park. It's a profound reminder of what dignity, humility, and resilience look like when challenged by ignorance. A retired federal judge, Langston had long upheld the law with integrity, believing in the power of justice to shape a better world. Yet, in one afternoon, stripped of his title and identity, he was reduced by strangers to a target of mockery and harm. What the teenagers saw was an old black man on a bench. What they didn't see until too late was the weight of wisdom they tried to silence. Through public reckoning, court hearings, and emotional accountability, Pinebrook transformed from a town known for its quiet prejudice into one of active learning. The youth who once followed cruelty became advocates for change. Community members who once looked away now leaned into truth. And Langston, instead of turning away in bitterness, stepped forward once more, not as a judge this time but as a teacher, a healer, and a bridge. This story isn't just about justice served in court. It's about justice carried in conversations, in small acts of reflection, in listening when it's uncomfortable. It's about what happens when people decide that the past won't define their future unless they allow it. The lesson here is universal. We all have moments when we are called to choose between silence and action, between assumptions and understanding. It reminds us that behind every stranger is a story, behind every elder is a legacy, and behind every mistake is the potential for growth if we're brave enough to face it. So take this with you. Speak up when you see injustice, listen more than you defend, repair more than you punish, and always protect the dignity of others, even when you think no one's watching. If Langston's story moved you, if it challenged something in your heart or opened your eyes to a truth we often avoid, then help us continue telling stories that matter. Subscribe to our channel to support more powerful, inspiring narratives that shine a light on the courage, struggle, and hope within our communities. Your voice, your support, your presence, it all helps us build a world that's not just fairer but fuller of grace.